Today I saw X-Men Days of Future Past. I kind of want to rant about this movie, but I kind of don't even want to bother. But either way, it'll probably involve spoilers, and I don't really know what to say that doesn't involve spoilers. So I'll just say that I gave it a 6 out of 10, and now I'll move on to the spoiler section. Now close the video if you haven't seen the movie. Okay, so sure, there were a lot of good moments in this movie. Well, really all that comes to mind is when Wolverine sees Jean Grey and Cyclops again. And I guess Quicksilver was kind of cool, although his character felt a little too comedic and it kind of clashed with the rest of the movie. My biggest problem is how much stuff they don't even bother to talk about. No, you know what? It's not even as simple as that. I thought the big problem would be with continuity, but they actually didn't mess with the continuity that much. In fact, they seem to do it more in X-Men First Class. The problem was, you know what? I don't really even know what the problem was. It's like they had their basic story, and other than that, they didn't really try. With the story, I mean. They tried to make that basic story enjoyable, and I think they achieved that. I did enjoy this movie, oddly enough, but I still kind of fucking hate this movie. I'm probably not even making sense. So I'll just start listing things that kept bothering me about this movie, and really bothered me after the movie was done and they didn't do anything about it. And then after that, I'll probably just wrap up the video. At the end of X-Men The Last Stand, in the credits, they showed Magneto somehow still has his powers, and Professor X is still somehow alive. And then in the credits for the Wolverine, 4 years later, they pick up from that, and they show there was actually a reason they had those scenes in the credits. And it makes it seem like they actually have a plan, that they knew The Last Stand wasn't going to be the last movie, and that they didn't just put those in the credits to tease something in case they decided to make another movie. With the scene in the credits for the Wolverine, it made it seem like it was all finally coming together. Magneto shows up out of nowhere, Wolverine is shocked that Professor X is still alive, and they make it seem like they're about to explain everything. And then I assume they do explain everything to Wolverine, but when the next movie starts, Days of Future Past, they don't show any of that. The movie starts and it's skipped ahead way past all of that, into the future, into the bad timeline, and none of that is explained. All they explain is what the threat is in the first place that made Professor Xavier and Magneto team up and then go find Wolverine in the credits for the Wolverine and caused this crazy bad timeline future. Professor Xavier just gives a quick explanation of that, and then they send Wolverine back in time to prevent it. How the hell is Professor Xavier still alive? And how does Magneto still have his powers? Oh, and also, when Professor Xavier is explaining what happened to make the future so bad, he talks about how it's Mystique's fault, which it is, and then he pretty much says, oh, by the way, I pretty much grew up with her, we're like brother and sister. Why wouldn't he have brought that up in any of the first 3 movies? Like, I know we as the audience already know that from watching X-Men First Class, but it's clearly a stupid thing they threw in for X-Men First Class, because he would have brought it up in the first 3 movies when they were fighting Mystique, but he didn't. But then he just brings it up real quick at the beginning of Days of Future Past. Pretty much just because. And you know what? That made me realize there is a big continuity error, because when Wolverine goes back, Magneto is being held in the Pentagon, and him and Mystique have already parted ways. And then after that, Mystique gets captured by the government and used to make all those robots that I can't remember the names for. Sentinels. Side note, and this didn't bother me that much, but in X-Men The Last Stand, there was an Easter egg where they had a Sentinel in a training simulation that looked almost exactly like the ones in the cartoon. And then they finally introduced the Sentinels into the plot in this movie, and they don't look like that. They look like Ultron. Well, the ones in the 70s kind of look similar, but that's why it didn't bother me that much. But the ones that look like Ultron are just stupid. Right, anyway, so they capture Mystique and use her to make the Sentinels, which means Magneto and Mystique wouldn't have seen each other again, which means none of the events in the first 3 movies would have happened. And this is before Wolverine goes back, so this is just something that happens anyway. Like, did they forget Mystique was a part of the first 3 movies? Because that doesn't make any goddamn sense. And also, if the government was already making the Sentinels to hunt mutants in the 70s, then it wouldn't have been such a tense political situation in the first 3 movies. Because it would have meant with Peter Dinklage's character in the 70s, they've already gone too far. If there were Sentinels back then, it would have definitely been something brought up in the first 3 movies at least. So none of that adds up. Let's see, what else? Why does Ellen Page's character suddenly have future powers now? Before she was able to go through walls, and now she can send people's minds into the past? Speaking of Ellen Page, and Halle Berry, and Patrick Stewart, and Ian McKellen, and all the people from the original trilogy besides Hugh Jackman that were in this movie, that was such a waste of them in this movie. All they had them in was in those weird, cheesy scenes in the future where they were all dressed like people from the future, even though it was just an alternate reality. And in fact, it wasn't even an alternate reality. It's the same reality from the first 3 movies. I'm not even gonna go down that rabbit hole. But anyway, that was a total waste of them. Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen were barely in this movie, even though they were on the posters and everything. It made it seem like this is going to be a movie with the young versions from First Class and the classic Professor X and Magneto that everyone knows from the first 3 movies. And they're all going to be in this movie, and Wolverine's going to be in the center of it. And the movie starts and you see the other X-Men, and it's exciting because you realize they're in this movie too. But no, they're just in the stupid scenes in the future. And Anna Paquin's not in those scenes, and Kelsey Grammer's not in those scenes, because I guess they died. And then of course Cyclops and Jean Grey aren't in those scenes, but they are in it at the end of the movie. And I actually liked that. I mentioned that already, but I liked that, because Cyclops didn't really get a good ending before. It was nice to see them brought back. It was kind of left at like a happy ending. But then of course they ruined that too with the next movie. If this had been the last movie, that would have been fine. But then they just do another movie where, from the looks of it, it's pretty much just seeming like the first 3 movies never happened. And by extension, I guess, Days of Future Past, which doesn't make sense because that had James McAvoy in it too, and he's like the main character of the next movie. I can already tell that movie's gonna suck. There's no way they can possibly make that make sense. Okay, also, in one scene, Wolverine had a flashback to when he had the adamantium put on him, and it showed a flash of Brian Cox as General Stryker. Even though in X-Men Origins Wolverine, the movie where they actually show the scene with Wolverine having the adamantium put on him, Stryker's not played by Brian Cox, he's played by the other actor. And then there's another actor in this movie playing a younger Stryker, and at the end of the movie when they pull the drowned Wolverine out, and Stryker's there and he says, "I'll take it from here," I immediately think, holy shit, they're just going to pretend like X-Men Origins Wolverine never even happened, because this is not at all in the timeline when Wolverine got the adamantium put in him. But then his eyes flash yellow, and I guess it's supposed to be Mystique, so I don't really know what my point was with that. But I also don't really know what the point was with that scene. So, touche? What else? They had these new X-Men in the future scenes, like one was apparently called Bishop, but we never learned their names because there are barely any future scenes in the movie, so you barely see those characters. So how about instead of introducing these 2 new weird X-Men for no reason, since you're already doing all these cameos, why not just bring in Angel again? Or Nightcrawler? I don't know, just a 3 years too late suggestion. I guess the bottom line is, as a continuation of X-Men First Class, this was fine. It didn't really mess with anything there. In fact, it kind of added to it, although I did already like the way it left off there, so they didn't really need to mess with that, unless they were going to do something cool with it, which they didn't really, because the past versions never meet the future versions of themselves, which would have been the ideal thing, even though I guess that doesn't really make sense. That's the coolest thing you could have done with this, instead of just having Professor X and Magneto meet Wolverine, which they already could have done in First Class. Oh, by the way, I just remembered, that's another thing that bothered me. They referenced Wolverine's cameo in First Class, and made like a joke about it. That cameo appearance in First Class was great. They should not be messing with that. They kind of ruined it for me, actually, because even though I keep saying they need to not forget the other movies exist, in that one scene where Wolverine just has a short cameo that was just for like a laugh, you don't need to remember that scene. That was just like a joke. It would be perfectly reasonable for the characters to not have remember meeting each other before. They didn't need to bring that up, so that bothered me. Anyway, what was I talking about before? Oh, right. As a continuation of X-Men First Class, this was fine. But as a continuation of the original trilogy and the cliffhangers that left us off on, this... wait. I just thought of another thing that went nowhere. The last scene in X-Men First Class, where Magneto goes and breaks January Jones's character out of wherever she's being held by the government. Like he goes to recruit her in his team. She never shows up again. What was the point of that? But as I was saying, this movie sucked as a continuation of the original 3 movies. And also, if I'm putting this all together correctly, First Class was only made as a bridge between the original trilogy and Days of Future Past. It's probably not as much meant to be its own movie, since it seemed like they were planning this the whole time with the credit scenes in X-Men The Last Stand. So then X-Men First Class can't really be considered as its own movie. I'm kind of thinking of it like a crossover, and it was faithful to X-Men First Class but not the original trilogy, but it's all the same thing, actually. I don't even know what I'm fucking saying anymore. So yeah, whatever, 6 out of 10. I enjoyed it, but I fucking hated it. Tomorrow I'll see X-Men Apocalypse, so I'm gonna fucking hate that too.